UDL in Action podcast wishes to acknowledge First Nations peoples in Australia and across the world whose songlines traverse the globe. We pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, whose cultural traditions inspire and continue to educate.
Welcome everyone to episode 8 of the UDL in Action podcast. We are delighted to have you listen in as we explore inclusion, innovation, and the real world impact of universal design for learning in classrooms of every kind. I'm your host, Rebecca Rosenberg. Each episode, we respond to real questions from real educators, teachers and leaders who are designing for learner variability and rethinking what inclusive practice can look like. As always, I'm joined by my brilliant co-host and friend, Rhonda Laswell from Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation in Indiana. Rhonda brings her expertise, insight, and hands-on experience built over decades to every episode. Rhonda, welcome back.
Thank you. It's always good to be here.
So, Rhonda, schools here in Australia have teachers who specialise in supporting the diversity of learners in our schools. They are often referred to as special education, inclusion teachers, or diverse learners teachers. Our first question today comes from my friend and colleague Janine, whose role is as an inclusive teacher. Her challenge, however, is that she often feels the responsibility of supporting and teaching all students in her school with additional needs, when her responsibility is supporting the classroom teacher. Janine's question is, how can inclusion teachers and school leaders use the principles of universal design for learning to gain buy-in from classroom teachers and shift the mindset that supporting students with additional needs is a shared responsibility rather than the sole responsibility of the inclusion teacher?
That is not unlike some of the situations we also face here in the States. I am curious, and I have an additional question.
Yes.
So, would those students typically be pulled out by that teacher to spend some one-on-one time together, or would that teacher be in the classroom supporting?
I would say it's both. So
Okay,
it just depends on the school and the school context. So some schools
absolutely.
have students in the classroom, have all students in the classroom with them all the time, and they can have a co-teaching approach for lessons, which I think can be really effective, especially if both teachers are on board. But then there's also there's programs that might be more where more explicit teaching is taking place with either in a one-to-one situation or a one to small group context.
Right.
My thoughts with this particular question is it's very much around the teacher not necessarily feeling as though that all students are in the class are their responsibility.
Absolutely.
Mm.
We face the those are your kids, right? And the
Mm.
truth is they're
Mm.
all our kids.
Yes.
And I would start out by saying that that is a culture piece, and that is also driven by the administrator. And so if you have an administrator that believes in inclusion and believes all kids are all our students,
Mm.
then that helps to support that. That goes a long way to helping to support that. However, in addition to that, when we think about UDL and the UDL guidelines and principles, and providing multiple entry points and levels of access to reaching the goal, and even that best first instruction, I would think the first thing you'd want to ask is what I am doing with that small group of students, something that could actually be pushed into the classroom as part of the first best instruction. Because oftentimes it's tempting to teach, kind of to that middle broad band. And then when we have kids who we see are, a little ahead, giving them some enrichment, and the kids we see behind them, we pull them out. And the truth is, we know in advance. It's not a shocker. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I have some kids ahead and some kids behind and da 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 da. That's never a shocker, right? But we act like, oh my goodness, I have these 8 kids or these 12 kids. And the truth is, variability is completely predictable. Completely. We know we are going to have students with certain challenges. Now, am I always going to have a student every single year that may be completely blind? Probably not. And then there's going to be some additional planning there. But we know that we're always going to have students who maybe have an issue seeing up at the front of the room or who are not reading on grade level. So my suggestion is that you don't have to spend hours and hours co-planning if that doesn't work for your schedule, but you can certainly step in, especially when stations are a part of instructional practices. Stations are beautiful because not only can stations be varied, every kid doesn't have to go to every station. So we may have, and the beauty of a station is I may have 5 kiddos who qualify for services, but guess what? I got 2 or 3 bubble kids who are right on that line that could really benefit from that. And so I can put them in the mix, and not every kid has to go to that station. Maybe today there are 4 stations, and I know I'm going to be told I'm going to these 2, and then there's one self-selected, right? So I think that that's a really good way to approach that. It's also an easy, low threshold way to get buy-in from a teacher, because if you say, hey, if I could just do a station and help support in this specific area, say of language arts, I don't know too many teachers are going to say, no, don't come in my room and help, right, with that. So that's a good way to start that conversation oftentimes. And I know that for students, being able to be in a smaller group and to rotate through stations is an easier access point for them as well. That doesn't mean that you don't have 10 or 15 minutes of large group instruction, right, with some scaffolding and support visually. But at the same time, those stations really provide that option to speak to the needs of the variability.
Fantastic. And with the stations, you would suggest how long would be appropriate for students in a group to work in each station, and also would you suggest those stations have a mix of student ability rather than just all the kids in one particular group at,
Okay, so
at one
the
time?
Right. So the length of the station, it really depends on the age, right? And so for a group of students, say, who are second grade versus sixth grade, I'm going to make that a little different, like 10 minutes, 10 to 15, 10 to 12 versus 15 to 20, right? Depending on what the activity is. And I would do this. I would have some activities where you can have heterogeneous groupings, right? And homogeneous. So you can go out, you can look at the kiddos, and you can divide them up and say, students who are in the green group or the blue group or by name are going to go to these stations. And so what our teachers have often done is they actually have an Excel grid that they'll put up, and you look up at the grid, you see your name, and okay, I know my name, I'm going to station 1 first, or I'm going to station 4 first. And it's easy for a teacher then to put kiddos together by ability if you want to, but then also mixing them up for some activities as well, which is really, really good for them as well. And I think that's really important. The other piece that I don't want to miss is that even inside a station, there can be an opportunity for choice. And let me give you an example. So you could have students writing their spelling words with markers, or writing them with chalk, or writing them in sand, or writing them in sugar, right? And I'll give you a perfect example of a situation where it's easy for us to sometimes misread behavior. I was in a first grade classroom and there was a student that they were wanting me to observe. There had been some behavior issues, and at this particular station, they were writing their spelling words, and they only had obviously so much time. And this student had written actually all their spelling words and had chosen markers, but had not cleaned up as quickly as everybody else and moved on. And as I observed, I didn't say anything. I just watched and watched and watched. And then afterward, I said, well, I think one of the reasons why there are some issues is the way the student's processing some of the things they're seeing. So this student had written their spelling words, each word in a different color marker in the order of Roy G. Biv, the color of the rainbow. And then wanted all the markers put back in order in the color of the rainbow, Roy G. Biv. So they weren't being a behavior issue. They weren't being slow. They were actually being quite
Strategic.
intelligent and
Yes.
strategic about how they were going about the process. So that being said, you can provide choice and option, which is great, especially for a student who maybe does have a special need. Having the option to use either their favorite color or to be able to write them in the color of the rainbow because they understand Roy G. Biv, is a whole nother piece to the puzzle, right?
That's
They will
wonderful.
always amaze us.
Yes, yes, and teach us their thinking as well, so we can
And that was a
incorporate it.
first grade student, right?
Wow, wow, wow. So
I
he
guarantee you, no, I was just gonna say, I guarantee you there was probably no other kid in the room that even knew what Roy G. Biv was, right?
so he was probably frustrated with being pushed on before he was ready to complete his task.
Absolutely.
So
Hmm.
that can be a really fine line to approach with our kids as well. So in that situation, would you just give him a countdown, or we're counting backwards before we're changing to the next station, use of timers, that sort of thing? So to support that understanding that we're here for a period of time, but then the requirement or the goal is that we're going to go to another station because we've got more things to learn.
Absolutely. And I would always suggest, no matter what, that a timer's up when we're doing stations so kids can see that visual. For kiddos for whom have a very difficult time during transition, and transitions are dysregulating,
Yeah.
doesn't matter who you are
Mm.
or how typical or atypical you are, transitions are just dysregulating. And so giving a countdown or a reminder or a visual cue where you're not actually saying something, a visual cue. But for a kiddo like that, I would probably begin recognizing and getting to know them so that I know what some of those quirks are, and just say, hey, you know what? If you need to organize the markers, that okay, take them along with you and organize them. Then when you're done, I'll take them back over. Just being flexible
Yeah.
will go a long way at them feeling valued and understood and heard.
Yes, for sure, for sure. That's excellent. Thank you, Rhonda. So our next question comes from Alex. Alex has worked for decades in regional high schools, so we're shifting from primary to high school. He's worked for decades in regional high schools as a curriculum leader and would like to know, as classroom demands evolve, how can applying practical strategies from universal design for learning empower teachers to feel more effective and deliver improved outcomes for all learners?
Oh, gee, that's that's a huge question because there are so many different ways that universal design for learning can be used especially at the secondary level. And one of the things that I try to remind teachers, especially at the secondary level, is if you are struggling to think about how to provide multiple ways for students to have access to skill and content, and that is to step back into an elementary classroom, because we forget that, oh, word walls work everywhere, right? Labeling things in more than one language works everywhere, right? Because as a high school teacher, you're probably going to have a student for whom English isn't their first language. So you just step back into that labeling, but you also put you can put their native language up as well, which can be super helpful. But I would say, number one, if I'm thinking about secondary, my brain goes to executive function and the cognitive load that is demanded at the secondary level by just navigating studentness. Okay. So what I mean by that is navigating a bunch of different courses, navigating what 5, 6, 7 different teachers prefer, what 5 or 6 different teachers' pet peeves are, right? There's a lot of demands placed on secondary students. And so I would say that as a curriculum leader, I would say unification, which you think that sounds the opposite of UDL, unification. But what we're unifying is the things that shouldn't have to be a barrier to a student, right? So if I am in a building where we have a learning management system, every single course should have vocabulary or videos or homework. The pages should be laid out the same, and that information should be in the same places, right? I'm not saying that you just do it one way, because we do want visual support. We want visual dictionaries. We want videos. I mean, we want text to speech, speech to text. We want all those enriching pieces of multimedia available, because we know our students can navigate that. But at the same time, their brains are not fully developed, right? So their executive function is still growing. And so as a curriculum leader, I would encourage your staff to be thinking about how they can actually bring about ways to take the cognitive load off of just being a student, right? Having to know where things are everywhere. And just having to navigate all those different personalities is really huge. And then also just stepping back into thinking about, what is the variability walking into my room, and how can I take those demands off? And this, in my opinion, is UDL too. So for example, we have students with food insecurity. Why not have a cabinet in the room where they know there's snacks? Why not? I mean, that is the very basic level. A student is going to be distracted, and they're not going to be engaged if they're hungry. We know that. We know how we are when we get hungry, right? And so I would be thinking about creature comforts. I would be thinking about Maslow's hierarchy and how you can bring about some of those pieces so that it's easier to get them to engage in content. And then some other simple things. Oh, gee, don't give anything less than a 50%. How much of an F do you have to have? Why do you have to have a 0? Why can't you just have a 50%? If a kid never turns anything all year long and they have a 50%, guess what? They still have an F, right? But if they have a 50 and 100, they have a 75, right? But if they have a 50 and 100, they have a 50. So at what point do we expect that kid to dig out of that hole? And what kids are really having to dig out of holes? So thinking about things like that. Here's another great one for secondary. We have a paper due. Hey guys, when do you think's a good due date? They know what their schedules are. They know what they have going on in other classes. They know what sporting events they're going to. 9 times out of 10, when you ask them, they're going to pick a date that's probably maybe even sooner than you. I've seen that happen, and teachers have gone, whoa, 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 wait a minute. I think you're being a little too aggressive. Let's go ahead and make it the following, whatever. So, but just asking them, it feels so different for someone to tell me your paper is due next Tuesday, and for me to say, well, I think I'd like it be due on Monday. Right? It's totally changed in attitude, even though one day sooner. So, in some ways, respecting them and their voice, and yet at the same time, providing them the support and structure they need as a student in a way that's kind and compassionate.
So basically what you're saying is asking, so for this person, for Alex, it would be saying to him to consider what teachers are opening to implement into their classrooms and unifying that. So all teachers or most teachers might be on board, considering what additional food items might be appropriate. Now that can be tricky in some classroom contexts for different reasons. But what about even, having stationery stations? I remember going into classrooms with you, high school classrooms with you, and there were stationery stations available for students to grab a pencil, to grab a pen, or
Yep.
whatever they might need. But so it wasn't another thing that they needed to grapple with or to make sure that they had or whatever. So,
Right.
and so giving them the option, even, we know data is such a big aspect of what our departmental hierarchy is looking for, because that's the evidence that supports decision making, etc., etc. And often it's around funding. So in regards to assessment tasks, what you're saying is having an idea ourselves as to when those summative assessments are due, but then saying to the class what day or around about what day, date, and time do you think it would be appropriate, or when do you think you could get this in for me?
Yeah, and if you want to dig even more into that curriculum piece, there's nothing wrong with unifying. So, for example, social studies, history, those kinds of courses, there's nothing wrong with a curriculum specialist saying, vocabulary is a huge lift in high school. Doesn't matter what content area you're in, right? So, what kind of support are you giving for teaching, pre-teaching vocabulary? Are you providing a visual to go with that? Are they able to think about what it looks like? Give an example, draw a picture. Are you putting up a word wall? Like, what are all the different ways you are giving students to have access, and then making it somewhat uniform, saying you should have a visual for each. You should have some sort of video clip or example. You should have a definition, just as a curriculum leader, going into the guidelines and looking at what those big lifts are and knowing that each teacher in each course should at least be doing these things, right? Every
Yes.
teacher, I would start by going in and making sure every teacher has on closed captioning anytime they show a video or a video clip. That's a simple thing to do and it's huge, but that's like a deal breaker, right? That's a very baseline thing to do, making sure that you've provided it in audio, in visual, in an example, bringing in something, an object lesson or an object that can help them to understand it, right? Putting them in a situation where they have to be involved in a skit, right? Or role playing. And so there are certain things that are just basics that we would expect to be done, across the board in every classroom.
And I remember going into every classroom and seeing on every board the goal of the lesson and why
Number one.
we're doing it. It was almost like it gave all students clear direction as to the purpose of our lesson and the purpose of the lesson, the goal of our lesson, but what the big picture was beyond the classroom. Yeah, it was
Yeah, and for secondary students, a beautiful thing to do is to actually hand them the state standard. Hand them the standard you're going to be working on, then have them put it in student-friendly language. And then once you do that, you kind of know what vocab words and that they do and don't know that are inside the standard, and that you can listen to their conversations, right? And then they can begin to become excited about what they're learning. And then you can actually post the student-friendly version that they come up with for the goal.
I love that idea. That's excellent. Excellent. Thank you.
And and it just makes it personal.
Yes, yes, yes.
And
And
I always say that the brain is goal directed. Either you give it
Yes.
a goal or it's going to have its own goal. And its goal probably isn't going to be anywhere close to the goal you want it to have as an educator.
That's by writing or having a goal in that manner, it also gives the students it's gives them agency. It's their idea. It's they have clear focus as to what they're doing and where they're going. That's great.
And the
Okay.
thing is, how often do they feel control, right? At that age, they so often don't feel any control, right?
Hmm.
They feel like all decisions are made for them. And even when you do those small things, it's huge for them.
Yes, I completely agree. I agree. So, Alex also poses our final question today. Alex would like to know, in your experience, what systematic challenges have hindered the implementation of universal design for learning, and how might these be effectively addressed?
Ooh, systematic challenges.
Mm.
Um, I think that because we're all people, right? And we all have different viewpoints, really being able to do deep level professional development to get everybody on the same page at the same time can be challenging. I think the systems that are in place to help support brand new teachers can be challenging because they're trying to learn also the grade management system, and they're, they're trying to learn the email system, like they're trying to learn all that other stuff too. So from that perspective, you just have to be creative. And then I think too, consistency across the board can really be a problem, whether it be from grade level to grade level, building to building, or content area to content area, because we know at the high school level, we have our main disciplines, but they're all ran by a head of each one. And so they have just as much power and influence oftentimes over what's taking place as the building administrator does, right? So, oh gee. And then I think too, just having people be able to effectively rate themselves on where they actually think they are with the implementation of UDL. Um, I think the biggest systematic problem, though, I don't think it's really bureaucracy per se, even though we all have standards and that we have to match and testing we have to do. Um, the biggest barrier is probably, oh gee, I mean, there's just so many different places this can go because of the variability piece, but I think it's just getting everybody on a base same page and being able to continuously move them forward and provide feedback. We just don't have the manpower and the staff to really go in and do effective observations and give good feedback versus someone running in to do an observation because of your evaluation, right? What we really want to see is this really rich conversation and this ongoing um, development of your skill set, much like we'd want to see with a student, right? But as adults and educators, we don't often have that. So I think that would, if a department chair or a curriculum leader could do anything, it's if they could go in and really look at the guidelines and have rich conversations with people and help make suggestions and help teachers feel safe taking risks and trying new things.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And perhaps just focusing on one thing at a time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
It is, don't we know it? So,
Yes.
Rhonda, thank you once again for your insight and practical know-how. I just, every podcast, I'm learning more and I feel really excited about it. But before we wrap up for today, what's our one takeaway you'd love our listeners to walk away with?
Oh, I think it's to have a lot of compassion and empathy for the executive part of the little brains, right? Because to get to the cortex, you've got to go through those other components. And to remember that just studentness, being a student, is hard for some kids. and they want to please you and they want to be successful, but sometimes the task of just going through what it takes to be a student gets in the way of them getting to the content or the skill that you have for them.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A big thank you to our listeners for your insightful questions. And thank you to all of you leading this important work. It's so important. If today's episode sparked ideas or reflections, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at udl.in.action.podcast@gmail.com. And if you'd like the show notes or resources mentioned, just get in touch, please. Until next time, though, keep designing for possibility, not predictability. This has been the UDL in Action podcast. Subscribe, share, and keep the conversation. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Toodaloo.